Hello there. The big question on just about everyone's mind today is, will the killing by the US of Qasem Soleimani lead to a wider conflict? And if so, how wide could that conflict spread? Firstly, as ever, please kick that YouTube algorithm up the rear end by giving this video a big, fat like. Now, the killing of Major General Qasem Soleimani, the man at the head of Iran's state security machinery, by a US drone strike near Baghdad airport in Iraq on Thursday evening, has raised fears that it could result in another large conflict across the region and possibly the wider world. The US action has also polarised opinion around the globe, and most of that opinion seems to be based around what people think about the US President Donald Trump himself, but not so much based on any objective assessment of the situation. So, after the assassination of Iran's 62-year-old Quds Force commander, are we facing World War III? Or a further erosion of stability in the Middle East? Or is this all just a storm in a teacup? Well, all that's yet to unfold. But what is happening right now is that the price of oil has jumped. After all, this could cause a drop in supply. Brent crude, for example, rose by 3% on the news, and in wider financial investment terms, BP and Royal Dutch Shell share prices rose as well. And any further escalation will drive oil prices higher, with the cost of living implications across the board to come with it. That's a repercussion that will have certain tongues wagging. Follow the money, they'll say. And there is history here, with the CIA and MI6 involvement in the bringing down of Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh in 1953, to ensure that the then Soviet Union did not get its hands on Iranian oil. Although there's probably a lot more to that story than just that. Especially as it was reported back in November last year that Iran had just located another new oil field containing 53 billion barrels of crude oil, which will increase the country's reserves by about a third. Then there's the upcoming US presidential elections to consider. Is this Trump's Thatcher moment, as some are claiming? Now, the first point to note here is that it is not a political game for pundits in the West to take lightly, as retribution for the attack is clearly on the minds of the Iranian regime, who will be out to prove a couple of things. And that is, despite the loss to them of Qasem Soleimani, who was, after all, their foremost proxy war mastermind, they will still want to somehow show that they have both the will and the wherewithal to take revenge on the US. But as I see it, their options are severely limited. The Iranian position is akin to the Germanic tribes of Europe, who could not face the Roman army with a frontal assault. And similarly, Iran cannot go up against the military and strategic might of America, unless China and Russia are serious about protecting their main ally in the Middle East. So Iran is constrained to either getting its own operatives out of the country to do their dirty work directly on foreign soil, or getting an influencer and orchestrator to convince others to do it for them. An influencer like Soleimani. Now remember that Russia, China and Iran have just completed joint navy manoeuvres called Marine Security Belt in the northern part of the Indian Ocean and the Gulf of Oman, with the Chinese Defence Ministry saying that the drills would deepen exchange and cooperation between the navies of the three countries. And on completion of the operation, an Iranian Navy commander said that all attempts by the US and its allies to disrupt the exercise were foiled. And there are plans for another such exercise within the next 15 months or so. But right after Soleimani's assassination, the Chinese were calling for calm and the exercise of restraint by all sides, a cooling down. So, was driving a wedge between Beijing, Moscow and Tehran so soon after those naval exercises also a consideration for the US administration when deciding whether or not to take action here? Now, when you take a look at one of the various maps on the web regarding the US military presence in the Middle East, you can see that Iran is pretty much boxed in. But not only that, the US armed forces are vastly superior to those of Iran in all aspects of military capability, from tanks to aircraft to naval assets to battle space management and, of course, nuclear capability. But it's not just that. It's also the amount of money and the manufacturing base you can draw on in times of need. And the US wins hands down on that one as well, even without allies such as the UK. And that is exactly why General Soleimani was so important to the Iranian regime, because he was an expert in waging proxy wars, with a former Mossad head, Tamir Pardo, saying that Soleimani went from being the commander of a force active mainly in Syria, Lebanon and Iraq, to being the head of a secret operational organisation whose main purpose was terrorism. And the New York Times ran an obituary on Soleimani and said that he was behind hundreds of American deaths in Iraq and waves of militia attacks against Israel. In fact, many consider the general to have been the second most important man in Iran after the Ayatollah, Ali Khamenei. There have even been rumours that Soleimani had his sights set on the presidency, something Soleimani himself had denied. He was also seen as a major player in the Yemen, as well as keeping Bashar al-Assad as the president of Syria. So Soleimani was no geopolitical chicken feed. Now, the White House is claiming it carried out the attack on Soleimani in response to reports that he was about to engage in some sort of large proxy military action against the US. And given that Soleimani's past would inevitably lead him to be considered as a very credible threat, you can understand why the US might feel obliged to take such preemptive action, as it would keep Iran hemmed in, severely limiting its ability to take any form of overt or covert military action. But given the likely threat, was the US justified in taking the man out? And the reactions around the globe to this are as mixed a bag as you would imagine, and also as predictable as ever, with the left screaming murder and irresponsible warmongering, whilst the right mostly cheers on. For example, just look here in the UK at the current leadership of the Labour Party, in the form of Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell, as well as many of its future leadership contenders, all of them in an anti-Trump meltdown over this news. And many of those on either side of the argument had probably never even heard of Qasem Soleimani or his Quds Force Command prior to the news coming out yesterday. But if Trump's firmly on one side of the argument, then, well, you can guess the rest. But whatever we on the outside think, those who have suffered at the sharp end of Soleimani's actions have been elatedly dancing in the streets. The hows and whys of what caused American forces to assassinate such a powerful key player in Middle Eastern geopolitics will be debated for some time to come, with reasons varying from the ridiculous to the sublime. Some pundits are calling America's decision to order the missile strike, which resulted in his death, a simple reaction to Soleimani's suspected ramping up of covert military ops. But others are referring to insults traded between Soleimani and Donald Trump on Instagram, so inferring that it was just a sort of personal thing. And many more theories lie in between. But let's put this in a bit of perspective, shall we? I find it impossible to believe that Donald Trump would twirl his 6 guns, turn round to his aides and say that he's having a bit of a spat with some Middle Eastern chap on Instagram, so can they dispatch a Hellfire missile-equipped Predator drone and take him out, with the response coming back of, "OK, yeah, Mr. Prez." This sort of op takes planning, legal checks, robust intel and full chain of command involvement from president to drone operator, as well as at least some international agreement, one would suppose. Now, one important thing to realise is that this sort of action involving state assassinations is not a modern phenomena. It's been going on ever since humans became humans. But up until recently, there was no social media to pass the message about so widely. So we were all reliant on the mainstream press, and the amount of control the government had over it to squash certain stories, or at least moderate them and control the narrative. Social media lets people loose, and also allows them to connect some dots, however accurately or inaccurately. But one aspect of this whole episode that does bother me is that claims are being made that the US did this unilaterally, that it did not consult or warn intelligence partners such as the UK government of its intended actions. And I take this as a sign of reduced trust between the US and its traditional allies, especially the UK, something we should regard with alarm. Are we now regarded as an untrustworthy and leaky sieve? In fact, from the news reports I've seen, it also seems that Donald Trump did not even feel able to share the info with Democrat politicians in the US for fear that the operation would be sabotaged by loose tongues or worse. Trump said after the event that this assassination had to be done and that it should have been done years ago. So he is obviously very content with his decision as something that was done in his country's national interest. So he obviously feels that there are many in his own national political sphere who do not have the US national interest at heart. And if he did not inform the UK PM and government of his intentions, then I would guess that he and or the people that matter in his administration also have reservations about us as well, a worrying thought. But it might also indicate that Boris Johnson is not the US presidential lapdog the Labourites would have us believe. There again, any claimed lack of warning does give the UK the cover of a sort of plausible deniability of any involvement. But getting back to the central question of whether or not we're gearing up for World War III with the superpowers lobbing buckets of sunshine at each other, I would say highly improbable to impossible. Neither the Chinese nor the Russians are averse to using covert muscle where needed, but they do seem to understand the concept of knock for knock at that level. So I don't think they'll be taking this event as something earth-shattering enough for them to get directly involved in it. The one exception might be a direct assault by the US and its allies on the country of Iran itself, but once again an unlikely prospect, I think. Although the US talked in May last year about sending a force of 120,000 troops to the area should there be any more trouble with Iran along the lines of attacks on shipping in the Straits of Hormuz, most people viewed this as more of an escalation of containment than a plan for a direct frontal assault. So although I don't see there being any immediate prospect of all-out war, I do sadly see more trouble brewing. Although hopefully this latest US action will have dampened any real Iranian ambition for the immediate gratification of revenge. At the end of the day, though, what do I think about the actual assassination? I have to say that, if all the intelligence is correct about this man's past and his capabilities, as well as his future intentions, then on balance this was the right path to take. And given that a former commanding officer of the 1st Battalion, the Royal Anglian Regiment, and later commander of all British forces in Afghanistan, Colonel Richard Kemp, is so adamant in his support of neutralising this threat in this manner, then that adds a lot more weight to that side of the argument. And he should know, should he not, having been heavily involved in the area since at least 1991. Anyway, what do you think? Please share and comment, and thank you for watching.